I think Mountain Designs showed Australian climbers that it was something that we could do ourselves.
It was a bit of a subculture. It's more mainstream now, but back then it was definitely a subculture.
I think Rick put climbing to the fore, and that's what was different about Mountain Designs. It saw climbing was what drove it. And I remember him telling me he started the business because he said I was a fanatical climber. That's why I started Mountain Designs.
Because Rick was Mountain Designs. Mountain Designs was Rick.
When I started climbing in the late 1960s, about 67, we didn't have Kern mantle ropes, which just everyone has them these days. You don't get anything else really. We had laid ropes, laid nylon ropes, and we even used hemp ropes. A lot of the climbs we did were long run-outs, and if you fell, well, you know, you'd be dead basically, or badly injured. So you just didn't fall, and it was just that ethos that I think drove a lot of the climbing in that era. You just didn't fall because there was no protection if you did. Rick White really started to develop his interest in selling climbing equipment around 1969, and well, Rick started his business out of an apartment at Greenslopes. It was a very small place, and later he and Pam moved to Sunnybank Hills, a house there where he had an underneath section, an old carport, which he converted into a much larger kind of retail area. So this is where we went to buy our gear. We'd just drive around to Rick's place, go into the garage, and there would be all the gear hanging off the wall, and we'd choose what we wanted, and that was the way it worked until he actually later managed to rent some shop fronts for a small place at first, and then getting bigger and gradually bigger and bigger. He'd rented a large, huge warehouse, you know, bigger than this house, and one end we set up a little workbench where we would cut materials. We had industrial machines set up there. I could do a bit of sewing. Rick couldn't. He couldn't sew to save his life, so he didn't have to throw him off the machine. And then we started making gear. We'd buy high quality sleeping bags and tents from overseas, buy one of each, and we'd pull them apart to see how they were made. As soon as we got the good material imported from the States, well, then things changed. I think people then saw that the quality of the material we had was equal to or better than the quality of the goods that were here, and they had an Australian flavour. I think, you know, looking back on it, there was quite an element of luck involved that the business didn't go under, you know, in those years, because he was just wanting to get out and climb as well as run a business, and I guess trying to mix those two, people have discovered it's very difficult.
In the early 70s, when Rick and Chris Meadows found Frog Buttress, it became a mecca for climbers, and new routes were being put up every weekend.
I remember clearly the day that Rick and Chris discovered Frog Buttress. It was vertical, smooth, totally different from the type of climbing we've been doing and we're used to in the glass houses, which is much more low angle, lots of mechanical holes. This stuff looked hard, and it proved to be right.
He didn't want it to be an aid climbing area. There's some climbs there that only the best climbers could do, and of course there'd be some aid put into the rock, but he never really wanted it to be an aided climb area, because he believed most everything could be climbed without aid. In 1975, when Rick and a friend went to Patagonia, the mountains there left a lasting impression on him, so much so that the logo of Mountain Designs is based on the skyline of Patagonia. It was designed by an American artist.
When I saw it, I thought, that's perfect. It really just sums up the era that Mountain Designs emerged from.
Well, they think they want to be different. They want to do their own thing.
It captured that kind of psychedelic era, you know, that 70s kind of, who cares, let's just, you know, we'll slap in the face for tradition, we just do it our way, and, you know, get used to it kind of thing.
Patagonia to the day he died was the mountain that got away. He never successfully climbed what he wanted to climb down there. Was the reason why the Patagonia skyline is on Mountain Designs logo. because it was the one that got away from him. In terms of sponsorship, Rick it was all about getting Australian climbers to the top of places, making people know how good we really are. So when sponsorship came along and he could afford it, he was very happy to give money to people. And there were so many things that he sponsored through Mountain Designs.
To make it to the top, it's going to take everything that we've got. You know, I'd heard about Rick White long before I met him. He was a bit of a maverick. When we came to attempt Everest, become the first Australian expedition to try Everest, it was almost a done deal that Rick would be, you know, the favoured supplier because of our relationship.
Could come up to Camp 2 tomorrow.
It was cool having, you know, a real climber as head of a gear company because, you know, that's not always the case. Usually, you know, in Australia it's quite rare really to have you know, one of the climbing community's foremost climbers actually have a business which supplied climbers. He said, you know, I always tell people that there's only 2 Australians who've climbed Everest properly, and that's you and Mike Groom, because to climb properly, you know, of course you have to do it without oxygen. Yeah, Rick was, you know, strong on ethics, and my decision to not use oxygen ever was because I felt exactly the same way. I think, well, if you want to use oxygen, then, or if you feel it's necessary to use oxygen, why not just go and climb something that's lower?
When Rick got sick in about 93, we'd come back from an expedition, and you feel fantastic when you come back from an expedition because you've been at altitude and you're back at sea level and your body's responding fantastically. But Rick never did. He seemed to be getting weaker and weaker, and he started to fall on silly things like climbing and things like that. He is eventually diagnosed with a disease called inclusion body myositis, which is a disease that attacks your muscles. Fancy being a mountaineer and having your muscles taken away from you slowly. Once the disease got to a point where he really could not do much outdoor climbing, we turned to the gym and eventually started mentoring firstly me and then young kids.
I first met Rick when I was 12. I've been climbing since I was 7 and competing around the world. Rick saw this 12-year-old blonde girl climbing with, you know, 25-year-old guys, and he sort of looked at us and went, oh, they could really benefit from some coaching. And that was his way into the climbing world again, and that was my way into really improving and competing at a much higher level. So it was a huge commitment that he had on my training, and really, like, it was for me, but it was also for him because it got him back into climbing.
It was all in here. Someone told me once that it's got nothing to do with his physique, it had everything to do with his head. And when I saw him in the last weeks before he died, I realised that it was all in his head. He was just an incredibly strong person. It's empowering to know that you've done something that most people can't do. Not because they're not strong, not because they haven't got the money, but because in here it's telling you you can do it. That was an incredibly strong message I got from him. And the most was when he passed away, that he actually lived and died that message.
Yeah, he was an inspirational climber for sure. He was very opinionated, and you know, he wasn't afraid of voicing his opinion, even if it was different to everyone else's. And he got respect for that. But he also got respect, of course, for being technically a very good climber.